Thanks for the opportunity to share some of our information with all of you. And this afternoon, we're going to look at the survival analysis of herds that have undergone a mycoplasma elimination. And certainly would like to thank Maria and Robert for helping with the statistics on this particular project, because it is a little bit of a interesting data set to work with. And again, the group at the Swine Vet Center certainly helping with their herds, contributing to the database, and the research team there as well. Again, we're going to spend a little background on the mycoplasma elimination. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I've done that before, and if you've got some questions about that, I'd be happy to share that with you later. Then we'll get into the survival analysis. We'll look at some of that preliminary data from the database, and then some conclusions and implications. Again, the talk this morning talking about the impacts of the mycoplasma on the grow finish, and certainly knowing that's where the major impact is. And I think one of the biggest frustrations for me anyway was as we started to see the gilt, replacement gilts coming into the systems being negative replacement gilts, started to destabilize some of our herds. And as we had the discussion this morning, and how do we get the gilts positive, and how do we know time zero, for me it just got too confusing, and I just said, let's get rid of it. We can get rid of this one. We don't have to fight that battle every day. And so I do think this is a key factor, and certainly the figuring out the timing, and thanks to Maria, we know that the 240 days of shedding, and then we have to work backwards from that farrowing event to make sure we get those gilts exposed at an early enough age that we're not shedding. And I think Maria and Eduardo's diagram here really does a nice job of kind of showing what we're trying to do. Get the pigs positive while they're young, allow them to stop shedding so that we have a low incidence on the pigs coming out as farrowing. And so that's really the background of how do we stabilize these herds. And then once we get these herds stable, then we're set up to take these herds to go negative. And so that really is one of the key factors in making this all happen. Again, this morning we talked about, it's all about the dollars. We talked about the different performance production parameters that we see, the gain, the mortality, and those things. So I'm not going to go into that again, but that's the reason we're doing it, and Bill kind of said the same things there as well. So the herd closure, again, really is where we started out with these programs, and really what we're looking at was to be able to stabilize that immunity. We'd started doing a bunch of these for PRRS and said, can we piggyback mycoplasma on top of it? And quite frankly, that's where a lot of our elimination programs have come from, is a piggyback on top of a PRRS closure. And we got lucky in the early ones. We took them long enough that we were able to make that 240 days, and that was just luck more than knowing until the research work got done. So again, the idea is here we stabilize that population. We get to, as Amanda said, that time zero, and then we stop adding sows till they stop shedding the organism. We keep flowing those animals into the sow herd until they're all gone. Again, one of the challenges, we know the 240 days really, to me, is the backbone of the program. And one of the challenges is, if you're going to start one of these programs, you got to get the animals infected, and the animals that are going to be there for 240 days haven't even been born yet. And so that's one of the challenges. You're going to have some animals get a little bit older, and so you've got to deal with that in the system. But we've been able to do that and really not miss a beat from a production breeding target standpoint, and being able to without getting old parity herds and that sort of thing. It takes a little management up front to be able to stay in front of that. Some of you have probably seen this diagram before. Again, we've done them with off-site breeding projects. We've done them, if we've got the GDU on-site, that's certainly the easiest and the most biosecure. We've done different vaccination programs, most recently doing more of a quarterly vaccination program once we start the program. And then about 7 weeks out, we come in and do, depending upon the antibiotics, we've done different antibiotics. Most have been done with Linco, doing 2 weeks of Linco. We've done the Palmitil AC, we've done the Avlicin. So there's different products been used here. The Draxxin to the piglets for that 4-week period of time, doing piglets at day 1 and day 14. And then kind of an optional one here is after we get done with the water medication, some people have put CTC in or Denegard CTC in just as a another step. Again, I think the most important thing is the time frame here. We've done the vaccinations, we've done the medications, we've had good success, and so it's kind of hard to change the protocol now once we've gotten there. We also developed the medication method, the whole herd medication method. Both methods have whole herd medication, but this one doesn't have any closure. And so we did it saying, can we go into herd that we want to get it negative right away because we don't want it to shed to a neighboring farm, or there's other reasons we want to be able to get that herd negative quicker. And so we went through and injected all the pigs, and 2 weeks later came with Draxxin, came back and injected all the pigs again, and then did the 4 weeks of pigs. And so you're doing an entire herd treatment program using an injectable. At least that's what we've done in these projects. And so don't worry about this. This is just part of the spreadsheet where we've tracked the herds over time. And just anywhere you see a yellow over here is where they've changed status. Anywhere you see pink, we weren't very smart. We moved positive gilts into negative herds. And so, again, don't do that. That's a bad idea. And when we look at the database here, like I said this morning, we're just about 200,000 sows. 72 farms, and when we look at the negative status on the herd closure, it's 77%, 53% on the whole herd medication, for an average of 75, and 4.2 years, 3.7 years, 4 years as an average. So again, seeing good longevity on these herds, and certainly, and this does include the herds that we move the positive gilts into. So again, I don't think that's a fair way to look at the actual success of the elimination, because we shouldn't have to be, because we made a mistake, shouldn't put the program at risk. And so if we take those herds out where we move positive gilts in, then we're looking at an 84%, and the whole herd medications at 53, that stayed the same. Pulls it up to 78, and again, the years are a little bit longer because we pulled out those herds that failed because we moved the gilts in there. So this making certainly a very nice number there. So the objective in this study was to look at the survival, and the survival meaning that the herd stays negative for mycoplasma. And then we wanted to say, what are some of the risk factors that help these herds to stay negative? That's really what I wanted to when I brought the data to Maria and Roger. Is there something we can say that makes a herd more likely to be there or not? And so we identified these herds that wanted to go through elimination programs and have been through elimination programs, and and most of them were similar protocols, and we had the two different styles of protocols. We had basically the herd closure with medication, and then just the medication with no herd closure. And then it takes a significant amount of time for the herds to establish their status. You got to know whether those herds continue to be negative, and then continuing to be patient and track them over time. Fortunately, I like to play with spreadsheets, so I started keeping a spreadsheet right away after we started the first one back in 2003. And so we're going to look at about 14 years worth of data accumulated on these herds that have been through eliminations. And you have to have herds and clients that are willing to track the database and understand what's happening. Again, in this database, it's field-based data. We didn't design the trial from the beginning, so it's a retrospective study. And so we're going back, and some herds we used unvaccinated sentinels, others we monitored vaccinated pigs. Some herds we had sentinels in the herd, others we didn't. But we determined the status of the herd and feel pretty confident with where we're at, knowing the status of the pigs. And again, watching the clinical signs downstream, I think the takeaway message is the pigs are going to cough if you're not successful, and you're going to know it, and the people out in the field are going to tell you pretty quickly that it didn't work. And then you need to investigate them and make sure if it's still positive or not positive. So, again, the information we collected in the database was the date the herd was considered negative, when we finished the program, the herd size. We kept track of production systems just to see if there was anything, and it might be as many as just one herd in the production system if it was a single farm. The inventory of sows, and then we kept track of the method of elimination. And so again, for the herd closures, we're 8 months, minimum 240 days. Some were longer, but I would say most of them were in that 240-day time frame. And we did, as I said before, use some different medication protocols. Again, there was no extended closure of the herds on the medication programs, and we have done some different antibiotics, but the majority of those have been with Diraxin. The statistics, again, I'm not sure I really understand all the statistics we did here, but I'll try and share the results with you. We did the Kaplan-Meier survival curves and the Wilcox test and the Cox proportional hazard model to try and model that and make it look like the herds were all at the same time frame. So again, I said in that big database, we got 72 herds, close to 200,000 sows. Smallest herd 600, biggest herd we've done is 8,000. Average herd is between that, around that 2,500 sow farm. So again, a lot of variation there. And we dropped out. Anytime you do a study like this, some of the herds aren't going to fit in the database. And so we ended up with 56 herds that we took through for this study. 45 herds doing the herd closure, 11 herds doing the whole herd medication, and the longest herd was 155 months. So again, long time to be established out there. And we had two possible outcomes, a reinfection with Mycoplasma or the herd remains negative to the end of the study or the censor time of the data. So here's the first chart. This is the Kaplan-Meier survival curve. And so essentially you start here with all the herds being successful, and then you see how they drop out over time. And so this dark blue line is the herd closure. And so you can see here we're in that 80% range all the way out here at 155 months. And you can see here on the whole herd medication, we started that a little bit later, so those don't go as long out there because they truncate earlier here just because of time. And you can see that they fall off much more dramatically, and we see more of the failures early on. But then once they've established whether you're successful at getting the mycoplasma out of the herd or not, they're fairly constant going forward. So when we looked at the analysis here, we were 81.4% successful with the herds in the herd closure and medication, and 63.6% on the herd medication programs. So again, some pretty impressive numbers really when you think about it. And when we went through and looked at all the different variables and said what are the possible risk factors, really nothing came up significant other than the different types of whether you did a herd closure or you didn't do a herd closure. And one of the challenges is I thought I had a pretty robust list of farms, and we took it to the statistician, and Robert said, boy, you just don't have very many farms, and I'd like to help you more, but you need to have a lot more farms to get a lot more detail and more granularity. But again, that's difficult to come up with, and so we worked with what we had. And the other comment that I felt kind of good about was he said, you just don't have enough positive farms for us to sort things out. And I said, that's a good thing. And anyway, so when we looked at it and did some modeling, and again, when we did the modeling to get to a 25% become reinfected, it was 155 months with the herd closure, and it was 8 months with a medication program as we model that. And so, again, the model's just trying to predict what would happen if we put all the farms on the same time frame, if we started all the farms at the same time frame and everything was followed through. And so that's what the model's trying to predict here. And I think it's kind of interesting, as I thought some more about this data, Maria, the 8 months is kind of an important number, right? If we make it to the end of shedding, we're probably okay and we're probably going to be good. And so it made some sense to me as I thought about the biology as well. And so, again, we looked at that modeling, as I said, and developed a number that's a hazard ratio, and it's just a number used to calculate how fast these herds are going to decay over time. And then, like I said, we started it all out at the same time, so every herd essentially was on the same curve. And then we're going to follow those over the full time frame, where in the data set that I had on the Kaplan-Meier curves, we were following the actual data. This is a modeled program. So you can see, again, the herd closures are much more successful than the medication program. And they drop lower than the actual data just because they're being taken all the way out to the end of the time frame at that 155 months. If we truncate that down shorter and say, let's look at the first 24 months, because that's where we got to be able to pay for everything, is back in this time frame. How many herds are failing early on if we use this predictive model? And you can see for the closures, there's not very many that are failing early, and even on the whole herd medications were not failing as early. Now, the actual data dropped off faster, and I think that's probably true because I think we don't get some of those to come negative. And this chart is, again, using the model to try and predict that. And this is the hazard over here. And we're saying how many months do we take to peak out on the hazard. And that 8 months is kind of where the hazard peaks based upon the data. And so, again, like I say, it kind of goes along with that 240 days of closure and fits that after that point in time, they're probably not shedding anymore. When we look at the hazard, and it's about a 10-fold less number. That's why we didn't have the two charts together, because you can't get that kind of difference in there. And so you see here you're out at about 50 months when that hazard peaks. And so certainly differences there between the two different processes. So the conclusions, the herd closure and medication method statistically is a better method for elimination, much more predictable. Again, we've had a very good track record, that 81% of the herd surviving. Again, I'll take those odds almost any day I get them if I'm going to be 80% successful. There's a lot of things I do that don't have that good odds. And so that's why we've pushed most of the herds this direction. But if you have a need and there's a purpose for the whole herd medication, if you can make it past the 8 months, you're likely to have good long-term success. And we've had some herds out there over 12 years with doing this program as well. So again, some herds, I believe what's happening with the whole herd medication is we don't get some of those herds to a true negative status, and they just break back on their own. And then once we get past that time frame, then they seem to be just as successful. So again, the implications for this study, I think, is elimination is something that can be done, certainly. And we have, if you're doing the herd closure with medication program, the odds are pretty good you're going to be successful and likely to succeed. I hope that more farms will be likely to do eliminations based upon the data and based upon the success rates here. I think the lateral transmission study we talked about this morning shows us that there's not very many introductions, and we can capture the actual economic value of the pigs. And it's a good investment. Doesn't take long to get back to break even. And the early herds show that there's good longevity even in the pig dense areas. So again, I think there's some good opportunities for people to pick up on the technology. Future work, again, continue to follow the herds over time. We're going to continue to follow the database, and certainly if anybody else has some herds that they'd like to contribute to the database, I'd be more than happy to include those as well, just to have a greater number so that we can make the statistician happy and have more farms. And then, again, I think there's going to be more methods of elimination. These are just a couple different ones, so I think creativity is the only thing that's stopping us from coming up with different ways to do it. And I think as we have a better understanding of lateral transmission and understanding those risk factors as well. So again, I'd like to thank Maria and Robert for their help in working with this database. Again, our clients for allowing us to do the elimination procedures and testing and follow-up, and the other vets in the clinic for helping with that, and our staff for helping to keep track of everything along the way. So again, I think that the mycoplasma elimination certainly is possible.